All right, so here comes the fun part. Step number 3 of this Project 3 exercise. We're going to jump into the Visual Basic. We're going to take advantage of the 2 macros that we've created so far, inserting headers, adding headers, and formatting those headers and the currency values. And we're going to create a loop so that we take those 2 macros and get them to be applied or work with the other 4 worksheets, or 5 or 6, or however many worksheets you have inside of your workbook. So we're going to discuss a new concept here that we haven't gotten into, loops within our Visual Basic. Let's take a look at how this is accomplished. So first, I'm going to get into my Visual Basic window. Now, there's a shortcut key that we could use here. On my keyboard, I'm going to press Alt F11, and this will launch my Visual Basic window. There it is. Now, I also want to point out that in the earlier lecture, we also saw that you can go to your View tab, you can go to Macros, View Macros, you could find one of your macros and then edit it. Alt F11 is just your shortcut key to open up the Visual Basic window. So now that I'm in here, I'm going to make sure that Module 1 on the left-hand side is open, it's active. I'll just give it a double click. Mine is. I can see that I have my Add Headers macro in there and my Format List macro. Those are the 2 that we recorded in the previous 2 lectures of this Project 3. So now we're going to get our hands dirty. We're going to jump in and build our own procedure, our own macro here with just Visual Basic. So here's our first step. I'm going to go up to my Insert menu, top of my screen, and I'm going to create a new procedure. I'll give this one a name. We'll just call this, let's see, Worksheet Loop. That sounds good. I'm going to leave the rest defaults. We're going to create a sub-procedure, and I'm going to leave the scope to public, meaning that we can access it in any module or anywhere within this project. And I'll hit OK. So now Excel builds kind of the stub, the beginning of my worksheet loop procedure. Now, here's all of our code. The idea here, a big picture. I want to be able to apply both my Add Headers macro and my Format List macro to every worksheet within this workbook. This is where a loop comes into play. I don't want to have to write the same macro 4 or 5 or 6 or 100 different times based on however many worksheets we have, but I want to create a simple loop that will go through all of my worksheets for me. So now it doesn't matter if I have 4 or 5 or 100 different worksheets, my loop will just do it for me. And it'll apply these 2 macros throughout all of those worksheets. Okay? So this is a loop. And this is a pretty neat concept, something that you're going to use a lot of as you build more dynamic type macros or procedures within Excel. Now there's a few different flavors of loops. The one that I'm going to use here is called the for next loop, and it's a very common type of loop. I want to be able to loop some block of code, some operations, a number of times. In this case, I want to loop it for each of the worksheets within my workbook. So here's what my loop looks like. I'm going to say it's a for loop, and I'm going to use a variable here that I'm going to create called I. I'm just picking I out of the air here. We can really call it whatever we like, but I is going to act as a numeric value that we're then going to iterate through. Take a look. So I'm going to say I for I equals, we'll say it as equal to 0. Oops, that should be a 0. 2. Now, I want it to start, actually I'm going to have it start out as 1. And I'm going to talk about why here in just a moment. So I for I equal to 1, and it's going to start out as 1, but I need it to loop through however many worksheets we have. Well, how many worksheets does this workbook have? It's got the recording one, that's the practice one, and it's got the east, west, north, and south worksheets, right? So we got a total of 5 worksheets. Now I could do this, 2, 5. But that's a hard-coded value, meaning I put that in there, and if I delete one of the worksheets, it'll still try to run 5 times. If I add 3 worksheets, it's still only going to run 5 times. I need to make this more dynamic. So I'm going to make reference to built into Excel VBA, we have an object called the worksheets object. And the worksheets object is really a collection of all the worksheets in our workbook. Okay, so if I have 5, worksheets is a collection of all 5 of those worksheets. If I've got 10 or 2, it knows how many worksheets are in this workbook. And it knows this because the worksheets object or collection has a property called count. So now it knows, hey, worksheets, you got 5 of them, you got 10 of them, you got 2 of them. It knows how many worksheets are in here. So I'm going to tell it to loop from 1 to the worksheets count, and however many that is. And I'm going to finish off the loop. I'll say next I. Okay, so now every time my loop runs, it starts out and says I is equal to 1. It's going to go to 5 or whatever. It does its stuff, and then it's going to go to the next I, would then be 2. It would repeat the process. 3, 4, 5, do your stuff, and done. This is a for next loop. So now, in between the for line and the next line, I'm going to tell my macro what it should be doing. Now, what I'd like to do here is I need to, let's see, think about this for a moment. And I want you to use in your own noggin here as well. Big picture, we need it to go from one worksheet to the next and complete the job. So my first step here is I need to get it to the appropriate worksheet. So I'm going to say, let's say worksheets, and I'm going to tell it to go to a specific worksheet. And the worksheet that I want it to go to, at least initially on its first loop, its first cycle, is to the first worksheet. Now, what's equal to 1 right now? Hey, I told I was equal to 1, so I'm going to tell it to go to worksheet number I, or I is really equal to 1. And I'm going to tell it to select it. Okay? Now, remember the next time my loop runs, what's I equal to? It starts out as 1, but then it does its thing, it loops through, and then I is equal to 2. It does its stuff, and then I is equal to 3, and so on. It'll do its job. Okay? So I'll tell it, hey, go to the first worksheet. Now, what do I want to do the first worksheet? Well, I want it to add the headers and then format it. Well, we've already got that. I recorded 2 macros earlier. So now I could just make calls to those macros. The first one was called add headers. Okay. What was the next one called? Let's take a look. I'm going to scroll back up here. And it was called format lists. So I'm going to come back down here and say, okay, well, now you got to do format lists. Great. So it goes to the first worksheet, does this stuff. Now what do we need it to do? Well, now it needs to go to the next worksheet. Well, that's the loop. That's where the for next comes into play. So it says, okay, I did this to the first worksheet. Now I'm going to go back up, check to see if I is still within that range from 1 to the worksheet's count. And if it is, let's increment it to 2, and let's move on to the next one and do it all over again. Okay? So let's test this out. Let's see if this works for us. I'm going to go ahead and minimize my Visual Basic window. I'll get down just to my worksheet here, my workbook, and I'm going to run the macro. I'll go back to View, Macros, and I'm going to view my macros. This will take me into where I now have 3 macros, including my worksheet loop. I'll select that, and I'm going to run it. Crossing my fingers here. This should loop through all 5 worksheets and format them, make them look good. I'm going to hit run. And look at that. I'm now on the South. That was quick. I'm now on the South Records worksheet. And look at that. It's got headers. It's got the currency values. North is the same. It looks pretty. It's cleaned up. There's West and there's East. I've now created a macro that'll loop through all of my worksheets in the workbook and apply my 2 previous macros, adding the headers and formatting the data. Simple as that. And I did it through a loop. Let's take a look at the loop one more time here. I'll go back to View and Macros and View Macros. And I'm going to hop into my worksheet loop and I'll edit it. Take me back to my code here. Let's bring that back up. Came up on my other screen here. There it is. A simple loop, a for loop, looping from 1 to the worksheet count and then performing these 3 operations. And we're done.